Hi, everyone. The webinar is about to start shortly. We're just going to give everybody about 1 more minute and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we're going to get started. I see that several people have started to join. A couple more might trickle in, but I think we can get started now. So hello, welcome everyone. I'm really excited today to talk to you all about the science of reading and how it applies specifically to mCLASS and Amplify Reading. Just a little bit about me. My name is Jenny Zosky. I am a learning scientist here at Amplify. My background in education and special education is as a speech-language pathologist. I've worked with kids with language delays and disorders from 2-year-olds all the way up to 5th graders and some beyonds on oral language and vocabulary skills, as well as literacy skills. Particularly in the school setting, I got really interested in the relationship between language and literacy skills. And so I went back to grad school for my PhD, where I focused really on those underlying language skills that are most impactful on the reading skills of at-risk students. I did research with kindergarten students through high school students, where my biggest focus was on adding instruction morphology, or instruction in teaching kids about the most familiar roots and affixes in order to help students learn new words during independent reading. So at Amplify, I'm a learning scientist. I've helped guide the development of Amplify Reading, most specifically related to the vocabulary as well as the comprehension content. And I'm also working on some research projects here related to the efficacy of several of our products. Okay, so just some housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. It will be emailed to all of you who registered. If you are having any technical difficulties, please let us know in the questions panel, the Q&A. We also recommend restarting Zoom if you have any issues. We will be answering questions at the end of today's webinar, but please feel free to send them into the questions panel at any time through that Q&A function. Okay, so this is an overview of our goals for today. We're going to talk about the science of reading and how it relates to a comprehensive literacy program. Then we will delve right into mCLASS as an example of a high-quality assessment. Then look at Amplify Reading as an example of a supplemental literacy program that's grounded in the science of reading. And then lastly, we'll leave a few minutes at the end for an audio clip from a real-life example of a 2nd grade teacher who uses both Amplify Reading and mCLASS DIBELS 8. So to start, I wanted to talk a little bit about the simple view of reading. We know that reading is not a simple process, but we do like to talk about the simple view because it highlights that in order to read fluently with comprehension, we need to be able to understand both the language as well as decode and recognize the words. So if either of these pieces is missing, fluent reading with comprehension does not occur. Some of you may recognize this picture. This is Scarborough's rope or braid. And really, we can think of this as sort of an expansion of the simple view of reading. We have these two strands, the green one and then the blue and purple one, representing the language and the word recognition pieces. And we know we need to have both of those. But what I like about this is it really shows the complexity of language and word recognition and how there are so many pieces that we need to develop and then tie them together to this really complex interwoven web in order to become automatic and strategic as we read. And these are just some of the ones that we want to highlight here: knowledge, vocabulary, understanding sentences, understanding connections across sentences, the gist of the overall text, as some of the underlying language pieces that are so important for reading comprehension. And then, of course, we know for word recognition, we're focusing on sounds, sound letter associations, and words. So if any of you have attended any of our previous webinars in the series, this graphic might be familiar to you. If not, this graphic represents a comprehensive literacy system. And we want to explain a little bit about what we mean by a comprehensive literacy system. And so there are 4 key elements that need to be in place in order to have an effective literacy program. You have your core instruction, which is that instruction that everybody gets. And that's represented by this darker orange rectangle here. You also have differentiated instruction and practice, and that's really embedded in the core. And then we have intervention, which sits outside of the core, and then data, which runs throughout the whole system. So the differentiated instruction and practice is where we're really extending the core to give students practice with skills that they need. So it's based on something already taught in core instruction, but it really should meet each student's individual needs. Now, since the goal of intervention is to really close learning gaps, this is the instruction that actually sits outside of core instruction time. It's highly specialized and it's targeted to those learning gaps. We know that data is really at the heart of this system. So we use data to drive so many of our decisions. It improves the accuracy of our instructional planning. It promotes a focus on student outcomes. It increases communication and collaboration among educators. And it provides feedback to educators on what is working and what isn't working for students so that we can take action when needed. To delve into this a little bit more, when you're using data within your core instruction and your differentiation and practice, you're using it as a goal to determine the overall health of the system. At first step, you need to know that your core instruction is working, right? It also helps you to plan small group instruction within your core, so to be able to know how to group students and also to know which skills to target. It will also help you to identify areas that will be personalized for different students for them to practice. When you're using data within an intervention, it's really driving the interventions, right? So at the onset, it identifies risk and need. It can delve deeper into the specific profile of that student. We can figure out what skills we need to target for this highly specialized instruction. And then we also want to continually monitor progress that the student is making, as well as the effectiveness of the instruction or intervention. So moving forward, I'm going to talk a little bit about mCLASS and how this assessment is linked to the science of reading. So this might be a review if you've attended one of our previous webinars, but it's really important when we're looking at assessments that we want to make sure that they're high quality. And so high quality assessments, we know that they should be aligned to the critical skills that we know are important for reading comprehension. They should be technically sound. We want to make sure that we're actually getting a valid assessment of the student's skills. And they should also be developmentally appropriate. So based on the child's development and age, we want to be, the assessment might look a little different. So looking at the first piece, alignment to those critical skills. DIBELS 8 includes measures of these skills, which research has shown that are really important for reading success. phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. DIBELS 8 subtests are also aligned to those subskills of reading that are associated with risk for dyslexia and other word reading difficulties. So Amplify has developed screeners of vocabulary, as well as rapid automatized naming, or RAN, and spelling, which provides a more complete picture for students, as well in these important domains, and it also helps screen for risk for dyslexia. So DIBELS 8 takes a curriculum-based measurement approach to assessing reading. The subtests are designed as brief, easily administered measures of reading. And because DIBELS subtests are timed, efficiency in reading skills is considered, as well as accuracy. DIBELS 8 was developed consistent with the most recent standards in educational measurement. These standards provide criteria for test development that promote the validity of interpretations of test scores. Researchers at the University of Oregon also designed and implemented DIBELS 8 with the goal to achieve the highest rankings on the National Center for Intensive Intervention's rigorous standards for screening and progress monitoring. So basically, we know that DIBELS 8 has high technical adequacy. There have been lots of research has taken place over multiple years with large samples of diverse populations of students. We know that it is reliable across multiple forms of reliability. It is a valid assessment across many outcome measures. It has rigorous methods for setting cut points, and it is sensitive to learning on a weekly basis. So you can be confident that the results that you're getting and also with the decisions that you're making based on assessment with DIBELS 8. These are the measures that are aligned to how students learn to read, and they're specific to different grades. So you'll see in the early grades, kindergarten, first grade, there's a higher focus on those foundational skills like letter naming and phonemic segmentation or phonemic awareness. And as you get up higher in the grades, it moves into a focus of just word reading, and then moving towards in the upper elementary grades, measures that are highly indicative of reading comprehension. So this is the first measure, letter naming fluency. It's important to note that letter naming fluency is not one of those basic early literacy skills. Whoops, sorry, this has an extra thing there. Okay, it's not one of those basic early literacy skills that we would want to intervene in, right? So this is just a measure of risk. And so it's how many letters students are able to name in 60 seconds. So they're just essentially shown this display on the right here and asked to name as many of them as they can. And this is given in kindergarten and first grade. Phonemic segmentation fluency measures phonemic awareness, which we know is critical for learning to read. This is a timed measure because we want to assess students' automaticity with skills. So it's not just about their accuracy, but also their fluency. So for this task, students break words into their individual phonemes, and this is in 60 seconds. And so for each phoneme segmented here, they're gonna get a point. And this is given in kindergarten and first grade. The next one is nonsense word fluency. So this one is assessing both the alphabetic principle, understanding of letter sound correspondence, as well as phonics. And so it's important to note that we use nonsense words because we know when we're using nonsense words, the students are seeing these words for the first time. So this allows us to get a real picture of their decoding skills, and there's no interference with any sight word memory that they might have. So for this one, students read or sound out these nonsense words for 60 seconds. They get a score for the correct letter sounds as well as the number of correct whole words that they read. And they don't actually have to read it as a whole word on their first try. If they do the 3 sounds and then sound it out and it's a whole word, then they get credit for the whole word as well. The next one is word reading fluency. And so this is a measure of accuracy and fluency during which students read real words out of context for 60 seconds. This is given from kindergarten through 3rd grade. And words are chosen based on their frequency in text. So some of these are going to be irregular. And and some of them are going to be decodable. So we're going to see a combination of both students decoding as well as sight word memory here. The next one is oral reading fluency. So this is one of the most researched measures here. It's highly predictive, not just of students' fluency skills, but also their overall reading skills, including comprehension. And the reason for this is, especially in the early grades, if students can read fluently, then they can devote so much more of their resources to comprehension, which is the actual goal of reading text. So this is given from grades 1 through 6, and students just read aloud a passage for 60 seconds. Okay, and then our last one here is maze. This is a measure of reading comprehension. Research has shown this task to be highly predictive of students' reading comprehension. So in this task, you'll see a sample here on the right. Students read, and there are places where there are blanks or closed statements in which they need to complete. So students select the correct word from those 3 options, and they have 3 minutes to do as much as they can. In order to complete this task, you need to have knowledge of vocabulary. You need to be able to have good syntax skills. You need to be able to link sentences in order to get an overall idea of the story. And so it's really tapping into a lot of comprehension areas. And so that's why it really is predictive of reading comprehension. And this assessment can be administered in several ways: paper pencil version, or it can be done online and scored automatically. There are 3 additional skills that are also important for reading success. We have vocabulary, spelling, and RAN. And these measures, especially RAN, or rapid automatized naming, and spelling, are measures that are important because they indicate risk for dyslexia. And so these are 3 additional screening measures that mCLASS includes if they're optional if teachers decide to administer them. Okay, so moving forward, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of developmental appropriateness in assessments. So when we talk about an assessment being developmentally appropriate, we mean that it really should be aligned to how children learn to read, and also to just the nature of their development in childhood, right? And so in this next video, what I would like you to do, I'm going to play it, but as you're listening to the video, this is a demo of our phonemic segmentation fluency subtask, where we're really assessing phonemic awareness. So just jot down some notes, and if you'd like to, put them in the chat so we can all see what everybody's thinking here about things that you see here that are indicative of developmental appropriateness, and also some specific things that you might be able to learn about this student's skills. Here it is right here. So feel free to listen, take notes, or pop them in the chat.
I am going to say a word. After I say it, you tell me all the sounds you hear in the word. So if I say the word miss, you would say is. If I say the word low, you would say oo, oh. Let's try one. Tell me the sounds in the word am. Tell me any sounds you hear. Oo, oh, oh. The sounds in the word am are Your turn. Tell me the sounds in the word am. Tell me any sounds you hear. Okay, here is your first word. For. Here. Who. Ooh. On. Wave. Ooh. A. Both. Oh. Ball. Ooh. Food. Food. Then. Tell. L. Bit. Bit. Ask. Ask. First. First. Bring. Bring. Stop. Good job.
All right, I think we might have had a little bit of technical difficulty with the chat feature, but I did see one person wrote in modeling by the teacher and then checking for understanding. Yes, absolutely. You know, this observational approach, it really aligns to the skill that we're trying to assess, right? So phonological awareness is a student's ability to manipulate sounds in words. And so it would be really difficult to understand the student's skills in this area without actually hearing the student produce the sounds. And we're also able to really provide some of this, you know, check for understanding to see if the student actually understood the task before going forward with it. Let's see what else. We can hear exactly how students are approaching it, right? We hear the sounds the student is making, and we can track their errors to guide the specific next steps for instruction. And importantly, I think, you know, sometimes we overlook the fact that, you know, we can really keep students better engaged in this type of observational assessment. It can be really difficult to keep students on task, especially for those younger students, to maintain attention during assessment time. And so with observational measures like this, we're better able to do so. And I think also importantly, you know, we can observe when their attention is waning and make note of that. And so you may have noted towards the end that the student was struggling a little bit more. And I wonder if it was really that he was having more difficulty towards the end, or if he was just, you know, his attention was waning and he wasn't as much on task at that point. Yes, someone wrote he had difficulty breaking apart the blends. Great, great. Yes, I love it. All right, so moving forward. Okay. So after all that, you know, I wanted to also talk about, you know, now that we know, you know, this is a strong assessment, it's aligned to critical skills, it's developmentally appropriate, it is technically sound, that is great, but it's not enough to have strong assessments, right? There are other tools, policies, and procedures that must be in place in order to ensure that decision-making happens that impacts instruction. And so this is an example of high quality reports that are easy to read. This is a visual display here. We need to make sure that personnel are trained for data analysis. And we also need to make sure that there's actually time to sit and review, make decisions, and implement those next steps. And so this is some really critical things that are sometimes overlooked. We want to make sure we have a great assessment, but then we want to actually make sure that we're using it appropriately and that we have the time to make decisions based on the data that it's giving us. So there are multiple levels of reports within the mCLASS system. Reports are available for both administrators and teachers. This is an example of skill level reporting here. Classroom reports can help teachers make the kinds of decisions that we've been talking about. They help teachers to look at students' overall reading skills, as well as the specific skills to evaluate the health of their systems, design whole class and small group differentiated instruction, as well as determining areas of extra need or extra practice for students. Okay, let's see how we're doing on time. Pretty good. All right, so I'm going to move into the next phase of this presentation now, in which we started off talking about assessment, and now we're going to move into talking about Amplify Reading, which is the digital supplemental literacy program. And it makes a nice transition because Amplify Reading actually uses mCLASS data to determine where to place students in the program. And so mCLASS data is used so that the teachers can be sure that the students are receiving the practice that they need without actually having to spend a lot of time analyzing the data and creating an individual plan for the student. And so if you think back to those orange rectangles where the Amplify Reading time often sits is in that differentiated instruction and practice time. There are several different models in which you can use a digital supplemental, but teachers often find it to be a really useful way to have certain students working on their own areas of needs while pulling individual students to work on individually during that differentiated time. Okay. So just a little more about the introduction to Amplify Reading. Amplify Reading, like I said, is a digital supplemental literacy program. It goes from kindergarten through grade 8. We are going to focus on kindergarten through grade 5 today. So the first band under imagination is kindergarten and first grade. And so the way Amplify Reading works is there's a sort of meta narrative that the student is put in. So they're in this world, and within the world they interact with different characters that give them different tasks to do. And embedded within those tasks are essentially it's mini games that represent skill practice. And so the meta game is really nice in that it is really linked to students' developmental stage. And so in kindergarten and first grade, the narrative is really about imagination and exploration. As you get into the next step, which is mystery, that's second and third grade. There's something mysterious happening and kids have to figure out what it is. And then moving into fourth and fifth grade, students are ready to take off and go on adventures. And so there's really sort of this adventure element linked in this part of it. The 6-8 program, which we're not focusing on today, is about rebellion. And so this one is really fun, rebelling against the machines, essentially. So I just wanted to give that as a sort of big overview of the narrative, the meta game experience in Amplify Reading. And then also note in this graphic here, you'll see the key literacy areas that students are working on as they move up, moving from foundational skills, going all the way to reading to understand deeply. Okay, so one of the main things that I wanted to highlight with Amplify Reading is that it is personalized and adaptive. And so to do that, I have these two fictional students here, Jamie and David, who are both second graders. So Jamie, her DIBELS 8 scores are coming up, putting her below benchmark, and David's are putting him well below benchmark. And so the content served to each of these students within Amplify Reading is driven by a learning map and an adaptive algorithm. The learning map is essentially the complete scope and sequence of content that's included across all the literacy domains. We have phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, comprehension, fluency, as well as close reading. So the content is sequenced according to research-based scopes and sequences, and students are placed within the scope and sequence based on their initial skills as measured by the DIBELS 8 assessment. And from there, the program adapts based on students' performance within the program. And so you'll see here, Jamie, in her first quest, she gets 3 different mini games, and she has an emphasis that's on continuing to solidify her decoding skills, practice automatic word recognition, as well as building her vocabulary and comprehension skills. So going from quest 1 to quest 2, you'll see the checks indicate that she's mastered everything up until she gets to the Grumpy Goblin sound spelling correspondences game. David, however, has a bigger emphasis on some of the earlier skills. So he gets phonological awareness and phonics games, which includes reading words and text. And this just shows that each quest has a variety of skills that are built and revisited over time, right? So David in his quest doesn't have any vocabulary or comprehension practice at this time, but he will get there. He's just starting where he needs to start first, which is really a strong focus on foundational skills. So if a student struggles or doesn't meet a predetermined criteria for a skill, so one of these X's here, they didn't essentially pass the mastery criteria for that game, they get 3 tries at it. But on the 3rd try, if they still are unable to pass it, that content is automatically removed from their set of activities. It will be presented to the student later after they've had some more time to practice with related skills. So when students struggle with one skill domain, they can continue to build skills in other areas. For example, a student struggling with early decoding skills can still advance with the comprehension skill domain if that domain is less challenging for that student. So the level of adaptivity is really custom for each student, and the experience is personalized. They get additional support and challenges that are just right for them. These are the skill domains in Amplify Reading, and I did allude to them already, but just wanted to call them out here. We focus on foundational skills, which includes phonological awareness, as well as phonics, letter sound correspondence, and fluency. We have a big focus on comprehension, including both comprehension processes and comprehension products, which I will get into in a later slide what the distinction is between those two. We include vocabulary, practice with close reading, and then importantly, practice reading in connected text, which we do in several ways. And I will get into that in a little bit as well. So moving into our first sort of main domain, foundational skills. So we're talking here about phonological awareness, letter sound awareness, and phonics, as well as practice in connected text for automaticity and to build word reading fluency, as well as text reading fluency. So phonological awareness is that understanding that words are made up of sounds and the ability to manipulate those sounds in words, starting with compound words, moving to syllables, and then to phonemes, which are the smallest unit of sounds. We know the phonological awareness skills are necessary for students to decode text. And so instruction in these skills has been shown to improve reading outcomes, especially when we practice phonological awareness and phonemic awareness in particular with decoding. And so in this example here, if you look on the upper left, this is a game called Zoom Boom, in which students practice rhyming. I'll show you in a later slide how we progress from sort of these earlier phonological awareness skills like rhyming and move up to some of those higher, even more critical skills like phonemic, segmentation, and blending. The next one, the one on the upper right, is one of our Goblins games. And in this game, students are taught letter sound correspondence. We know that letter sound correspondence and phonics instruction helps students crack the code by highlighting spelling regularities and giving them the rules that they need to know in order to decode new words, building towards that automatic word recognition. And so in the Goblins game, the goblins say the sound, and then the student has to choose the letter. And you'll notice that there's sort of a faded picture cue behind there, and those go away eventually once students have practice. The game on the lower left is called Word City, and here students continue to build their phonics skills. They are building different words by swapping out letters and adding letters here. And then on the lower left, this is a game called Curioso Crossing, and this is really our game in which we're giving students lots and lots and lots of practice in building word reading automaticity. And so the word is said aloud, and the students need to pick the word that was said. So this is just one of the ways in which we're practicing automaticity, and I'll show you a few more in a couple of slides. Okay, moving on to comprehension, which is one of my favorite ones. So comprehension instruction, there are two pieces of it. So one piece is what sometimes you typically think of, which are the products of comprehension. So these are things like identifying what the main idea is in the story, comparing one text with another text. This is the work that students do after they have completed reading in order to demonstrate their comprehension. The other piece of comprehension is comprehension processes. And this is the work that students actually do during the text in order to comprehend that text. And so if you're familiar with mental model building, so the ability to, as you're reading a text, you're sort of coming up with this idea in your head, creating a picture in your head of what you're reading. That's the mental model. And so those underlying language skills that we've referred to in previous slides are some of the pieces that are highly critical in order to get students to really be successful in building their mental models. And so if students are not successful in building their mental models with these comprehension processes, they're not really going to ever get to the end, which is being able to show their comprehension with comprehension products. And so for that reason, Amplify Reading was designed to include both of these type of comprehension focuses. So for example, you'll see here in the lower left, this is an example of a comprehension product game. And so students are asked the main idea here. And this is just simply a main idea game. But then if you look at the two slides on the right side of the screen, these are examples of some of our comprehension processes game. And when we chose which comprehension, there are tons of potential candidates for comprehension processes, but when we decided which comprehension processes to focus on in Amplify Reading, we wanted to choose the comprehension processes that not only have been shown to be linked, so to be predictive of reading comprehension, but we also wanted to find ones that have had intervention research already done that was showing that students who worked on these skills actually grew in their skills and it impacted their reading. And so one of these things is inference. And so the upper right screenshot here is our game storyboard. And this is our inference game, and it's for kindergarten through second grade students. So it's really at the beginning level of getting students to understand that sometimes authors leave details out of their text, and they have to use their background knowledge to fill it in. And so in this case, the author left out the fact of where they were. And excuse me for 1 minute, I just need to drink some water. Okay, so that is Storyboard, our inference game. And then below it is a game called Unmask That, which in itself is actually a kind of inference itself. Students are asked to figure out what the antecedent is that the pronoun is referring to in this game. And so they're taught in this game that sometimes authors use pronouns instead of repeating a name over and over again. And it's your job to figure out which pronoun is used. And so these are just two examples of some of our micro comprehension processes games. Okay, moving on to talk a little bit about vocabulary. So, excuse me. We know several things about vocabulary instruction from the research. We know that students learn most of the words that they're going to learn through independent reading. And so we need to focus on a really small set of these to teach for explicit direct instruction. And so the ones that we should teach are high utility vocabulary, sometimes called tier 2 vocabulary. And these are those words that cut across multiple domains. These are words like generalize that you would see not in conversational language, but in academic text, and it could appear in your biology textbook or your literature or your math. And so it really gives you great bang for your buck that these are gonna really be high utility vocabulary words to teach. And so Amplify Reading teaches those. We have a game for the younger kids, and then we have a different game for the older kids that focuses explicitly on tier 2 vocabulary. And so the one on the top here is called Word Raiders, and this is our younger elementary game in which we teach these tier 2 words. The other piece is that we want to not only focus on just knowing the definition of a vocabulary, but we want to be able to teach students to really develop depth of knowledge for all of these words that we're targeting. And so depth of knowledge has been shown in the research to be more highly related to reading comprehension outcomes. And so we want to make sure that when we target, we're not just asking them to define. We want to give them multiple opportunities to see each word across context. And so in Word Raiders, for example, for each target word, they need to complete context sentences. There are at least 3 of them per word, and they're going to vary. They also need to figure out what are common synonyms and antonyms for those words. And so you'll see here, the last screen is sort of the culminating activity in this game, in which students actually have to build a word map or a semantic map in which everything they learned about that word is represented: the synonym, the antonym, the definition, and a context sentence. One other game that really gets at depth of knowledge is called Shades of Meaning, and that's the game in the middle. And in this, students have to organize groups of related words into semantic gradients. And so you'll see here they're ordering them from cold to hot. And this is just one way to really get at understanding really slight differences across words and really building your depth of knowledge for those words and linking words in your semantic network. The more words you have linked together, the stronger your vocabulary is going to be. And then lastly, one of my favorites, of course, is morphological awareness. And so we know from the research that we should be providing explicit strategy instruction in morphological awareness. And we actually do that in two ways in Amplify Reading, both through a decoding lens and also through a vocabulary or meaning lens. And I don't have a screenshot for the decoding one, but we do teach students to chop words into their constituent morphemes as a strategy. But in the vocabulary game, this one here, the bottom screen, it's called Inkblot. It's one in which we teach students, we do model this sort of slashing between the suffix, the prefix or suffix and the root here. But the main point of this game is really to teach the meanings of these frequently occurring roots and affixes, and then also teach students how to use them in a sentence context. Okay, and then I also wanted to talk about close reading. Close reading is the intensive analysis of high quality grade level text. Close reading offers an opportunity for your students to engage with complex text in a deep and meaningful way. It's a skill that is needed across all content areas in order to successfully analyze and understand the overall text. And in Amplify Reading, we do that specifically with students in grade 4 through 5. And if you remember, that was where in our other slide, we kind of shifted to a different, to an adventure kind of feeling. And so part of that adventure is students have access to this portal that allows them to travel to another world. And as part of that other world, they interact with these really interesting characters through a comic book style. And they also are taught about some text analysis and practice doing close reading in text. And speaking of practice with connected text, I did want to just wrap this all up with talking about how we do this in multiple ways. So students play games in Amplify Reading in order to practice their accuracy and automaticity in connected text. I did show you the automaticity game from the word reading slide, but this is another one, the upper left. This is a game called Read All About It, and this is our game in which they practice reading newly learned sound spelling correspondences and phonics rules in short texts. We also have a game that explicitly focuses on reading fluency, and this is Story Lab. It's the game on the upper right. In this game, they listen to a model of the text being read aloud as a model of good fluency and expression, and then they practice reading the text themselves. And then lastly, the bottom two, since we know that learning is promoted when students use their knowledge across tasks, we're really hoping to encourage generalization through our ebooks. And our ebooks have embedded activities that reinforce the skills that were recently practiced in some of our related games. And so here you'll see the bottom two are some examples from our e-reader. You'll see the first time they read through the book, there are no pop-ups that come up. But then the second time, they do get some tasks. They're thought of as like, here are some challenges. And these challenges are meant to sort of reinforce some of the skills that they've been learning in some of the mini games that they've just practiced. And so there's a sort of a comprehension question here on the left. And then on the right, you'll notice this is Unmask That. So the pronoun resolution game that I'd referred to previously, this is an embedded task within eReader that helps students practice it in connected text. Okay, so moving on, I did want to talk about sort of overall, what are some of these key features of personalized practice? So we've gotten into sort of what are the domains that we should see and that we do see in Amplify Reading, but then digging a little deeper, how are we instructing students in this sort of digital platform? And so these things are, instruction should be direct and explicit. It should be systematic and sequential. These are all things that are probably review for all of you, but they're important to call out. We need immediate feedback. We should teach to mastery, and we've already gone through how Amplify Reading adapts so that it's aligned to students' specific needs. So to get into these in a little more detail, Amplify Reading is systematic and sequential. We incorporate the principles of sequencing skills through a large body of research on the features of effective instruction, right? So these principles include teaching pre-skills before the new skill or strategy is presented, introducing high utility ones first, introducing easier ones before difficult ones, new information at a realistic rate, and providing adequate practice and review. So just as an example, with phonemic awareness, I wanted to show you kindergarten students would see this progression in their phonemic awareness going from the easier phonemic awareness skills moving up to the more difficult ones. And so the top one is the rhyming game. In the middle, it's a word bot game in which they need to blend flower together at the syllable level. And then on the bottom screen, we see phonemic blending in which they hear ah, and they have to blend it together to build the word man. Direct and explicit. So all games in Amplify Reading include models of both the game mechanic and the target skill at the very beginning of the game. And so these, we call this onboarding. These are some screenshots that show the onboarding for the game Word Slide, which is a phonics game as an example. So in each game's onboarding, we have the goals of the game that are explicitly stated for the students using clear and concise language. And the skill and the game mechanic are broken up into steps. And so onboarding is always interactive. And so you'll see here, it teaches the student, it shows the student what it's looking for, and then it has the student do it sort of with a little bit of help. And so it's an I do, we do component. And then as students move on to the first standard item within a game, that's the part where they start practicing on their own. Okay, and moving on to immediate feedback. In all of our games, students are given multiple opportunities to practice a new skill, and they're given immediate feedback and or corrective feedback and scaffolding. So this is just as an example, the feedback of the game Gemini, in which the students are figuring out what the word is. They're having to do phonemic blending. So in each item in Gemini, students hear the individual sounds and they have to select the picture that the word bots say when put together. So after the first incorrect answer, students are given immediate feedback. They're prompted to try again and hear the individual sounds again. If they're still struggling, so after the second time incorrect, they're actually placed in sort of a different loop. They're provided with more intensive scaffolding. Students are shown this screen in which they're shown that you can blend the sounds together to make the word. So you'll see here each notch on this line makes the sound bots read the sounds closer and closer and closer together. So this is first modeled, and then the students can actually manipulate the slider on their own in order to really hear how when you bring those sounds closer together, you get the word fish. And then when students, of course, answer items correctly in a game, they are provided with positive feedback that affirms their correct response. Okay. So we are on, let's see, I think I skipped a slide. Yes, sorry, I skipped a slide. So I also wanted to talk about teaching to mastery. So each of our games included in Amplify Reading's scope of instruction include mastery checks. So the students' next step for instruction are driven by their mastery of the content within the games that they completed. So teachers can actually go on to a dashboard in Amplify Reading to see the content that the student has covered and where a student may be experiencing difficulty or what we're calling a trouble spot in the content. And so you'll see here that this student is exhibiting some difficulty with segmenting syllables. Okay, and then let's talk a little bit about supports for struggling readers and English language learners. I think some of what we've just been talking about, sort of this really direct, explicit instruction with embedded feedback and practice loops for students who are exhibiting some difficulty are really key pieces that are effective for struggling readers, including English learners. That corrective feedback provides them with support, allowing them to try again. I did want to point out that we have VO support, so voiceover support, For many of our games, especially our earlier games, we want students to be able to play the comprehension games without having to be able to read. And so we have them voiced over. We have reveal words. So if you look at the upper left picture here, this is a screenshot from one of our e-reader texts. And so any of the words that we think might be particularly difficult are revealed here with the definition. So students can click on a word that is underlined with a dashed line, and then this pop-up comes up. They can click to hear the word read aloud, as well as the definition of the word. The bottom left picture is showing this mouth cue. And so this is the game where the students have to feed the goblins toast. And so I wanted to point this out. This is actually part of the beginning modeling of this game, in which you're taught, you're seeing the picture. It's a video in which the mouth goes ah. So you can see like that mouth cue to help you make that connection between the letter and the sound. If students are struggling and need this as a support throughout the game, there's a little icon that they can also click on to hear it and to see it again. And so that's another example of a scaffold there. One thing that I wanted to point out for the Spanish language specifically is that we do have Spanish language voiceover for that metagame experience, sort of the overall narrative experience that the students interact with, as well as the instructions for many of our games as well. This game here is Shades of Meaning. This is the one, the big one on the left, on the right, is the one where students rank related sets of words by semantic gradients. And I just wanted to play this because it kind of shows a nice example of that feedback loop. Oops. So I'm going to fast forward to when they're actually playing the game. They get it right a couple of times here. So I'm going to move forward to when they're actually going to get it wrong. That one's right. So what they're doing is ranking these words here from cold to hot. And you'll see that is right. And then for this one, I believe it's going to be wrong. And so you're ranking it from least angry to most angry. And when the student gets it wrong, some of the ones they get wrong are flipped over and they're shown the definition as a support. And then they try again. If they're still wrong, then they're put into this embedded deeper instruction in which they're shown a picture cue to really highlight the differences between these related words. And then lastly, they're given some additional practice with these words to learn different contexts in which they might apply. Okay, I'm going to stop that there because we are running short on time. Where I wanted to wrap up before questions was with this real life example from Nancy. Nancy is a second grade teacher from California. We had a nice conversation with her the other day in which she was telling us a little bit about her experience with Amplify Reading and DIBELS. And we wanted to share that a little with you guys, just for some perspective from a real teacher. And so as you're listening, she talks about a few things that I've talked through today. Things like being able to really differentiate instruction for her students with Amplify Reading, how DIBELS helps her in that each student has a personalized journey based on their actual skills within the program, and then also that it's been particularly helpful for her English learners. So let's take a listen. Whoops.
Others, but the majority told me they enjoy Amplify Reading, and I believe that student engagement is imperative to their achievement. Research shows that there's a strong correlation between student engagement and student achievement. So it seems that Amplify Reading provides students with frequent feedback to them as they're learning their new strategies, such as decoding or reading strategies such as highlighting keywords in the text, because all of them are working at their level. I think it's also great that the DIBELS testing in mCLASS is informing my instruction. And it's also in the Amplify Reading program itself. So it's guiding them through the reading strategies that they need to work at their level. So it's important for me to spend time with my students one-on-one or in small groups during reading instruction. And so Amplify Reading and mCLASS have helped me to differentiate the student instruction. mCLASS gives me distinct information about how students are performing in regards to their letter sounds, decoding, word reading, reading accuracy, reading fluency, and comprehension. So I know how each student is doing on each of those skills. So I can pull students and I could work with them in a small group or one-on-one on what they really need work on. And it's very specific that the help I'm able to give them while the other students are engaged on Amplify Reading program, and they do really enjoy it. So I have 20 students and 14 of them are English language learners. So the majority of my EL learners are my struggling readers, and many don't have parents who read or speak English proficiently at home. So they have difficulty helping them on the homework. I do send fluency homework as well. So they have difficulty reading with their students or their children. And I believe that amplifying skills that they need and to practice and they need to learn that they're not getting at home. And it just reinforces what I'm doing in the classroom. And I think it is helping them slowly improve in reading.
Okay, so I hope that was interesting to hear from the experience from a teacher there. We are taking questions. We have been taking questions throughout, but I'll wait in case a few more come in. We're just going to have a few minutes here. I did want to do a couple of these last slides just so I don't forget them. I wanted to inform you that we do have other webinars in this series that have already taken place, but if you register for them, we will send you the recording. If you have not already checked out the Science of Reading, the podcast, I would very much encourage you to do so. We have Susan Lambert, our host, talking to some of the most well-known researchers in the area of reading, as well as educators from a field, and it's really interesting. And if you're interested in Facebook, please join us in our Facebook group, where we, the goal of this group is really to connect people who are interested in reading and science of reading and helping all students become better readers, and really it's been great so far in doing that. So I will go back to the questions. One question that I have here is someone said, you are discussing DIBELS. What is the connection to Amplify CKLA? Will we be able to correlate this to Easy CBM? Our district uses that assessment instead of DIBELS. And then I have a related question, is Amplify Reading different from CKLA? Okay, so I can take that. CKLA is Core Knowledge Language Arts. It's Amplify's core literacy program. And so it's our instructional program that's provided to all students. So it's different from Amplify Reading, in that Amplify Reading is a digital supplemental literacy program. So it's not intended to be a standalone by itself. It's intended to be included with a core curriculum. And it goes along very nicely with CKLA. It's aligned to CKLA. And then related to Easy CBM, yes, we are able to place students based on outside assessments as well. It's not just DIBELS. We can place students based on Easy CBM. Let's see, what else? I have a question about, are the language activities read aloud? So for the early grades, yes, they are not read aloud for all of the upper grades, but we do have what we call a robo voice feature. And so all of them, I believe, I'll have to double check that, but all of them, I believe, can be accessed through some sort of read aloud. And then, are the DIBELS assessments embedded in the program? So no, the DIBELS assessments are not embedded in the program. What happens automatically though, if you're an mCLASS DIBELS customer and an Amplify Reading customer, we use the DIBELS data to automatically place students in Amplify Reading. So Amplify Reading is a separate program. What is embedded in in Amplify Reading is an assessment that is very much like the maze assessment. That's one of the subtests from DIBELS 8. And so it's not the exact same assessment, but it is an embedded assessment that we use as a measure of student growth within the program. Can English learners start at any level? Are there guidelines or research for using Amplify with language learners? So yes, English learners, we have, English learners can start at any level. We have some students who are working, older grade students, 4th, 5th grade, who are working on some of the earlier foundational skills. And so we definitely consider the needs of the student. And so students who need the early foundational skills in the early grades, not just English language learners, but students with who are severely behind in their reading skills can get that. As far as guidelines or research for using Amplify with language learners, we just have some preliminary evidence from last year's usage for kindergarten through 2nd grade that showed that our English language learners who used the program actually made much better growth. Everybody made growth, but the English language learners made even more growth than our native English language speakers. And I think, unless there are any other questions, we are a little bit over time. Okay. Thank you. I'm so happy that I was here to share this with you today. And please, if you have any other questions, please follow up, and I'd be happy to answer them. All right. Thank you.